There's something powerful about vulnerability. It's magnetic. When you're open with someone, when you're real, it invites connection. But there's a difference between being open and giving away your power, between sharing parts of yourself and handing someone the instruction manual on how to hurt you. And that's what I want to talk about today, because there are things, specific things, that too many women share with men too early or too freely. Not because they're weak, not because they're naive, but because no one ever told them it was okay to hold some things back. When a woman tells a man early in a relationship, "I'm afraid I'll never be enough," it may seem like a moment of vulnerability, but what it often communicates is a deep internal narrative of unworthiness. That sentence carries weight far beyond what's being said. It hints at years of self-doubt, rejection, comparison, and emotional pain. And when that kind of insecurity is handed over too early in a connection, it doesn't just invite understanding, it can also shift the balance of power. Suddenly, the man is no longer just getting to know you. He's being given a role you never asked him to take on, the role of your emotional validator. The relationship is no longer about equal exchange. It's about his ability or willingness to make you feel enough. This creates a dynamic where your worth becomes dependent on his attention, affection, and approval. It invites him to become the mirror in which you measure your value, instead of building that foundation within yourself. This kind of confession can also spark a silent emotional contract, one where the man begins to feel that if he doesn't constantly reassure you, or if he fails to notice a change in your mood or tone, he's letting you down. That's not the beginning of intimacy, it's the beginning of pressure. Men are not drawn to neediness, not because they don't care, but because they want to fall for someone who is already standing in her strength. When you tell someone you're not enough, it challenges them to either convince you that you are or to unconsciously agree with you by pulling away. And unfortunately, many will do the latter, not because you're broken, but because they never signed up to be your repairman. It's a heavy emotional burden to place on someone who hasn't yet shown if he's emotionally safe or capable of holding that level of trust. Also, when you reveal that fear too early, it communicates that you're looking for him to fix or rescue something internal. That desire to be fixed, seen, saved is profoundly human, but no man can fill a void that only self-love can seal. A man can affirm your beauty, your intelligence, your heart, but none of that will land if you're walking around with the belief that you're not enough. You'll always question his compliments, doubt his affection, and interpret his distance as confirmation of what you already feared. And that puts strain on both of you. It's like trying to fill a leaking bucket. No matter how much someone pours in, it will never feel full if the hole underneath hasn't been patched by you first. There's a quiet kind of power in not needing someone to tell you who you are. When a woman walks into a relationship already knowing she's enough, not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded, self-respecting, emotionally mature way, it shifts the entire tone of the relationship. She doesn't cling when he's distant. She doesn't unravel when he doesn't reply fast enough. She doesn't audition for his love. She receives it because she believes without a doubt that she's worthy of it. And that belief doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. It's evident in her presence, her boundaries, her tone, her ability to walk away from what doesn't align. But the moment a woman speaks the fear that she's not enough, especially early on, she risks putting the relationship on unstable ground. Not because she's unlovable, but because she gave away her emotional leverage before truly knowing if the man across from her could be trusted to hold it. When a woman begins opening up about her past and says something like, "All my exes hurt me," it might feel like honesty, like being real and transparent about her emotional journey. But to the man sitting across from her, especially in the early stages of connection, it can send a very different message. It introduces a narrative that positions her as someone who's been repeatedly mistreated, and it frames all her past relationships in a negative light. While the intention might be to show vulnerability or explain her emotional caution, the unintended effect is that it can put pressure on the new man to prove he's not like the others. It sets up a dynamic where he feels like he's walking into a test instead of a relationship. Instead of naturally growing together, he now feels he has to overcome ghosts from a past he wasn't even part of. On a deeper level, sharing this too soon also reveals that those past wounds may still be active. And when a man senses that you're still emotionally entangled with the damage done by someone else, it makes him question whether there's enough room for something new to grow. It suggests that your emotional energy might still be tied up in unpacking what someone else did to you. There's nothing wrong with having scars, we all do, but to present those scars as the opening chapter of your connection sends the wrong signal. It can make a man feel like he's not being evaluated on his own merits, but instead on how well he can heal what someone else broke. That's not love, it's emotional labor. There's also a risk that certain men, especially the emotionally manipulative kind, will listen to your stories of pain not with empathy, but with calculation. If you tell someone early on that your ex was controlling, or emotionally distant, or unfaithful, a man who lacks integrity might actually use that information to figure out how to gain your trust. By being the opposite at first, he learns how to act like the cure to your past trauma, not because he genuinely is, but because now he knows what you're looking for. He knows how to mimic healing behavior to win you over, only to reveal his true colors later on. When you give someone a detailed history of how you've been hurt, you're also giving them a roadmap for how to either comfort or exploit you. That's why discernment is essential. Not every man deserves your history. Some should only ever get your presence. It's one thing to share your story once a bond of emotional safety has been established. Once a man has shown consistency, honesty, and respect, then yes, sharing your past can deepen intimacy. It can help him understand how you've become the woman you are, but that kind of openness has to be earned. If it's given too freely, it can end up defining the relationship instead of enhancing it. Because once that story is told, it lives in the space between you. And if the man isn't emotionally mature or ready, he might begin to treat you through the lens of your wounds rather than seeing the strong, self-aware, resilient woman in front of him. Also, when you focus too much on how others have hurt you, you unconsciously anchor yourself in victimhood. You become the character that life happened to, rather than the author of your own healing. And when you embody that narrative, it becomes hard to attract someone who sees you as whole. Men aren't looking for perfection, but they are drawn to emotional strength. They're drawn to women who can own their past without being owned by it. Sharing pain is not the same as processing it. Until your story feels like something you can tell from a place of reflection rather than reactivity, it's best kept sacred within yourself or with people who are proven safe containers for it. When a woman reveals, either directly or indirectly, that she feels incomplete without a relationship, it shifts the entire energy of how she's perceived. This doesn't always show up in obvious ways, like saying the words, "I need a man to feel whole." Sometimes it reveals itself in subtle behaviors, anxiously waiting for his text, rearranging your whole day just to accommodate his availability, ignoring red flags because being alone feels worse than being mistreated. This kind of emotional dependency creates an unspoken pressure that is heavy for any relationship to carry. It communicates that the relationship is not just something you want, but something you need to feel okay about yourself, and that dependency is where the imbalance begins. Men are intuitive about emotional energy. Even if a woman doesn't verbally say she's relying on him for her sense of fulfillment, he can sense it through her reactions, through her emotional highs and lows that rise and fall based on his attention. When every action of his becomes a litmus test for herself, worth whether he compliments her, shows up on time, responds quickly, he begins to feel more like a lifeline than a partner. That's when the dynamic starts to erode. What should be a connection between two whole people becomes an unspoken contract that he's responsible for how she feels about herself. And no matter how much he may care, that's a weight few people are willing or able to carry long term. This pattern often stems from a deeper belief that being in a relationship validates your value, that if someone chooses you, it means you're lovable, desirable, worthy. But the danger is that if that relationship ever ends, or even if it simply shifts in tone, you're left questioning your identity. You begin to see yourself only through the lens of who you are to someone else, rather than who you are within yourself. And that kind of instability makes it impossible to experience the peace and power that come from true self-possession. A woman who relies on relationships for self-worth tends to ignore her own needs. She overcompensates. She gives more than she receives, often in hopes of securing her place in someone's life. But love born from fear is not sustainable. When you are terrified of being alone, you tolerate things you shouldn't. You stay longer than you should. You lose pieces of yourself trying to preserve something that was never meant to be held on that tightly in the first place. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you were never shown how strong solitude can actually be. Ironically, the women who find the most fulfilling relationships are often the ones who have already built a fulfilling life without one. They don't enter a relationship looking for rescue. They enter it with joy, with curiosity, with discernment. They don't give all their time, energy, and heart before a man has shown he's worthy of it. They know who they are in the absence of a romantic partner, so when one shows up, it's a compliment, not a cure. And that energy is attractive because it feels secure, not only to the man, but to the woman herself. She's not performing for love. She's not striving to be chosen. She's simply living in her truth, and anyone who gets to be part of her life is stepping into something solid, not something fragile that needs to be constantly held up by his presence. The more a woman pours into her own self, worth through her passions, friendships, goals, health, spiritual grounding, the less she needs a man to fill that emotional space. That doesn't mean she's closed off. It means she can receive love without clinging to it. She can enjoy a man's affection without depending on it to feel whole. She can walk away, if necessary, because her identity doesn't vanish the moment the relationship does. And that kind of woman doesn't chase love out of desperation. She welcomes it because she's already in relationship with herself. When a woman confesses to a man that she's been stalking his ex or obsessing over who he dated before, it may come across as playful or even self-aware in the moment, but underneath that confession is a deep insecurity that begins to erode the connection. It sends the message that she's comparing herself to someone she's never met, and that comparison tells him she doesn't fully trust what they are building because she's too busy looking backward. No matter how casually it's said, that kind of admission causes a shift in how he sees her. Suddenly, she's not just present in the relationship, they are now dragging his past into their present. It brings unnecessary baggage into a dynamic that was supposed to be about something new and clean. Even if it's said with a laugh or wrapped in sarcasm, the emotional tone behind "I saw your ex on Instagram" or "I scrolled through her photos" is rarely neutral. It signals that she's measuring herself, wondering if she stacks up, or if she's just another chapter in a pattern he's been repeating. That can make a man feel cornered, like he's being asked to prove that he's not still emotionally tied to someone he may have long left behind. It can make him defensive or guarded, not because he has anything to hide, but because now he's dealing with suspicion instead of trust. And that kind of energy chips away at the attraction that brought the two people together in the first place. On a deeper level, this behavior often comes from the need for control. When a woman is still learning to trust herself in a relationship, it's easy to feel unsettled by what she doesn't know. So she tries to gather information, scrolling, digging, looking for signs, hoping to find some kind of reassurance that she's not stepping into something she'll regret. But the truth is, the more you dig into the past, the more unsettled you often become, because nothing you find will truly answer the question you're really asking: am I enough for him? That answer never lives in old photos or old comments. It lives in how he treats you in the present, and more importantly, how you feel about yourself outside of him altogether. When you reveal to a man that you've been tracking his ex, even if it's done jokingly, you shift the power dynamic. You tell him you're mentally competing with someone who's no longer in the room, and in doing so, you shrink your own presence. You take the focus off what you bring, and you start living in the shadow of someone who no longer matters to him. But by giving her your attention, you give her relevance, and he sees that. He sees that you're not just observing his past, you're being affected by it, and letting it influence your self-perception. That doesn't just make him feel uncomfortable, it makes him question whether this relationship is being built on security or comparison. Men aren't immune to jealousy or curiosity either. But what makes a woman magnetic is when she chooses not to act from those emotions. When she feels the urge to compare and chooses confidence instead. When she notices the temptation to snoop and instead leans into the trust she's building. That kind of energy is rare, and it speaks louder than any words. It says, "I know what I bring to the table. I'm not worried about who came before me because no one else is me." That mindset doesn't require constant affirmation because it's already grounded. It's not that she doesn't wonder or feel insecure from time to time. It's that she doesn't lead with it. She doesn't make it his responsibility to fix those thoughts. She manages them herself, and because of that, she walks into the relationship as an equal, not as someone silently competing with a ghost. When a woman tells a man, "I'll change for you," even in small ways or subtle moments, it can seem like an act of love, a gesture of devotion, or a willingness to compromise. But beneath that statement lies a dangerous precedent, a willingness to mold oneself to fit someone else's preferences, desires, or expectations, often at the expense of authenticity. In the early stages of a relationship, it's easy to want to impress, to adapt, to align. You might find yourself saying you enjoy things you don't, agreeing to things you're unsure about, or downplaying your own needs just to avoid tension or conflict. But when you consistently offer to change who you are in order to be accepted, it becomes less about connection and more about survival. You begin to perform instead of participate. This pattern often comes from a deep fear of loss or rejection. It's the idea that if you don't bend, you'll break the connection. That if you don't become exactly what he wants, he'll lose interest or walk away. So you start observing everything: what he likes, what he doesn't, what makes him pull closer, what makes him pull away. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin editing yourself. You stop expressing opinions that feel too bold. You suppress emotions that might feel like too much. You start shrinking in ways that feel invisible but accumulate over time, until you no longer recognize the version of yourself you've become within the relationship. And what's even more painful is that men can sense this shift. They can feel when a woman is no longer fully herself, but instead reflecting a curated version she believes they want. It doesn't build intimacy. It builds unease. It creates an emotional fog where genuine connection struggles to survive. A man doesn't fall for a woman because she becomes what he asks for. He falls for the woman who owns her space, her energy, her boundaries, who brings her full, unfiltered self to the table without apology. When a woman changes herself to hold on to a man, she may keep his attention for a while, but she loses something far more important: his respect. Because respect isn't given to someone who abandons themselves. It's given to the one who stands rooted, even when it would be easier to contort. The temptation to change for someone is strongest when you believe your natural self isn't enough. That belief can be rooted in past relationships where you were criticized, overlooked, or made to feel like your needs were too much. So when a new man enters the picture, you instinctively adjust, thinking that maybe this time, if you just do it right, you'll finally be loved in the way you crave. But love built on constant adjustment is exhausting. It leads to resentment, emotional fatigue, and the quiet heartbreak of knowing that you're not being loved for who you really are, but for the mask you've chosen to wear. True compatibility doesn't require reinvention. It invites growth, yes, but mutual growth. It asks both people to evolve while still being themselves. A man who is truly aligned with you won't ask you to shrink, silence, or contort your essence. He'll want to understand it, support it, challenge it in healthy ways, but never replace it. And the more you abandon yourself to win someone's love, the more disconnected you become from your own value. You begin to measure your worth through his moods, his validation, his acceptance, forgetting that real power comes from self-honoring, not self-erasing. It's in the moments when you say, "This is who I am, and I'm not changing just to be chosen," that you become unforgettable. Because confidence isn't about being loud or dominant. It's about being anchored in your truth, regardless of whether someone stays or leaves. The most powerful relationships are not built on oversharing, emotional dependency, or self-abandonment. They are built on respect, self-awareness, and boundaries. When a woman knows what parts of her are sacred, what truths should be protected until trust is earned, and when to hold back rather than overexpose, she commands a different kind of presence. Not by manipulation, but by self-possession. Love isn't about giving someone unlimited access to your heart the moment they show interest. It's about discerning who deserves to enter your emotional world. The moment you stop proving your worth and start honoring it, you stop chasing love and start attracting something deeper. Something rooted in mutual admiration and real emotional safety. Keeping certain things private isn't about secrecy. It's about strength, self-respect, and protecting the parts of you that are too valuable to hand over too soon.